recording. So mainly for the sort of format will be I'll waffle on for another minute or two, then will take over and give you some genuinely interesting and useful content for about 20 minutes, half an hour. Then there'll be opportunity to ask questions. We'd encourage everybody to ask questions, and also if you've got some ideas or information you want to share, please do that via the chat function. And then if there's a sort of a something you want to sort of respond to from somebody else's question, just stick your hand up. We'll monitor that and use that function within Teams. If you don't want to be recorded, we can sort of pause recording if you want to answer a question, if you're in witness protection or anything like that. But we are recording this. This will be made available on the YouTube channel, and also just sort of held for our own records and make sure that we're following up on any actions or anything afterwards. So Northwoods is a woodland initiative. Within Northwoods is a specific programme of which this is part. It's an innovation programme. It has a number of different aspects to it. It's really about trying to support woodland management, particularly in unmanaged and undermanaged woodland across the north of England, also the east side, so that's Yorkshire and Northumberland, County Durham, that kind of area. The innovation angle is sort of many-fold. If you have an innovative idea, then we're able to support you with, unfortunately not with hard cash, but certainly with advice, with insights and with expertise. Will is part of a wider team that are able to provide one-to-one support, and potentially a number of days of support if you have ideas that you'd like to bring forward. There will be more practical demonstration events, so it won't all just be webinars. There'll be networking events. We've done a few in-person events. We've got a few more coming up, which I will just sort of summarise. So we've got a Woodland Owner Insights event for the Northeast. That's happening on Monday in Newcastle. All details of all this are on the Northwoods website. Then more webinars, how to sell your timber, how to engage forestry contractors, if that's something you're looking to do if you're a woodland owner. And then we'll be looking to gather sort of insights and stakeholders and things. So there's quite a programme of events that will run over the next sort of two or so years, but a fair bit happening before the end of March. So I'd encourage you to go on the Northwoods website and just follow the breadcrumbs through to the Eventbrite website. And we're also doing a number of things ourselves, so it's not all just sort of relying on people out there who have ideas to come to us. We're doing quite a lot of work around GIS and mapping in the My Forest platform, which you may be familiar with, and that will include building an inventory and a timber auction module. So that will be a tool that's accessible to woodland owners to put their timber to market. So that is in development. And we're also looking at a broader action to really try and re-establish Northwoods as a body that can support woodland owners, forestry contractors and others working with trees and timber across the north of England. Certainly when I got involved in it for the first time, I think back in 2003, we built it from not a lot to something that put a lot of support into the sector. Similarly, Will ran the sister initiative down in Yorkshire called Yorwoods, and we did a lot of work on everything as diverse as charcoal producer groups through to providing training and support for individuals and enterprises, new entrant programs, trying to bring people into the industry because it's it's an interesting, exciting place to work. So that's probably enough waffle from me, unless there's anything else on that next slide, Will, or are you going to get stuck in and... Oh, here we go. Yes, probably should mention the partners and the funders. So we're funded by the Forestry Commission, and the partners, where the lead partner is Reheat. Will is RDI Associates. We have Timber Auctions, obviously developing that timber auction platform. Martin Glynn, who a former colleague of Will's and my own, has a similar amount of experience to Will in forestry and rural business support. And in there also the Silver Foundation, who have developed the My Forest platform, which is a sort of an easy to use open access tool to stimulate forest management. So now over to you, Will. I'm going to shut myself up, turn my camera off, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Neil. That's great. Thanks for all the introductions. So yeah, just to summarise what we're going to talk about the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to leave plenty of time for questions. Neil, you'll let me know if there's any problems with the technology cameras, audio, etc. If I don't hear anything, I'll keep going. I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept of requiring a felling license or a management plan. What does that mean? Is it necessary? We'll talk about the UK Forestry Standard. It will be a very brief introduction to that. We'll talk about appraising your woodland, and from that appraisal, how to set objectives, and then go through that planning process. And I'll show you that in, excuse me, a series of maps. Nice, but better to understand than lots of text. And then Neil's already introduced some tools to help you plan and manage, and then we'll go into the question and answer session. Hopefully a lot of you out there have some knowledge and experience of woodland management, and hopefully we can give you a few additional pointers of where to go for additional information or additional support during this webinar. But yeah, please do lodge your questions in the chat function, and we'll follow that up once I've run through the slides. So what do we think about felling licenses or management plans? Well, a felling license is a requirement if you want to fell trees. There are various nuances under the regulations, and of course, if you don't want to fell trees, you don't need a license. Make that pretty clear from the outset. Basically, it gives you consent from the regulator, the Forestry Commission, to fell trees in your woodland. There are various limits, as I said, nuances, various cubic meters of timber per calendar quarter you can fell without a license. Over and above that, you require one. It's a fairly straightforward process to get a license. It depends on the constraints on your woodland, but if that's all you want, you can go ahead and apply for one, and you can manage your woodland under a felling license. And as I said, if you're not felling trees, then you don't require a license. If you wanted to think about sort of longer term planning, longer term management, then the woodland management plan would probably be your better option. This ticks both the legal and what we call sustainable boxes. So sustainability, meeting the full criteria set out in the UK Forestry Standard, and we'll introduce those key themes in a minute. It depends on the size and complexity of the woodland that you have, or the woodland that you're managing or involved in the management of, as to how involving that woodland management planning process would be. But what's key is that you understand, you've done your woodland appraisal, you've set your objectives before you consider going down that planning process. There's various support grants available for you to help write management plans. And they are very useful for management in terms of inheritance tax and capital gains tax purposes, and they can also unlock other sources of funding, and in particular the current stream of countryside stewardship funding for supporting management in woodlands. That will obviously change in the not too distant future into this new environmental land management scheme. So what does it mean? What's the difference between the felling license and the management plan in terms of the admin burden? And it's quite important to understand this. Like I say, the felling license process is fairly straightforward. You can set up your own online account. There's a felling license online tool that the Forestry Commission has created. You can go ahead and set up your own account on that and apply for your own felling license through that. It's a little bit of technical stuff to get through. But there are various help tools and functions available to guide you through that process. And obviously, if you're feeling a bit lost during that process, we can certainly help out on that, and there are others out there that can help you do that. In terms of a management plan, it is more complex, much more complicated, and in particular, you need to start to consider about whether or not you're going to get your land registered on the Rural Land Registry. Are you going to apply for grants? You'll have to go through what's called an RLE1 process, and this can take additional time. So if something you want to kick on with and get on with, then a felling license might be your best option. But if it's something that you're thinking about longer term, then the management plan might be your better option. Apologies for all the acronyms, by the way. Woodland WMPG is Woodland Management Planning Grant. CSHT is Countryside Stewardship Higher Tier, which provide the woodland management funding options, and the RLR is the Rural Land Registry. The RLE1 process is a form you fill out to get your land registered. So what is this UK Forestry Standard? So this is our guiding document. It sets out good woodland management practice and the legal requirements around that, and it's separated into these key themes. So we've got biodiversity, so it provides guidelines on you know what you do, what your woodland management objectives, how they may affect biodiversity, whether it's in your woodland or adjacent to your woodland, and maybe guidance on how to improve the biodiversity values of your woodland. It sets out the guidelines around climate change and what should be considered when managing your woodland under best practice. You know, thinking about how biotic and abiotic stresses are going to affect our woodlands in the future, and what decisions you can make now to make your woods more robust in the future. Sets out guidelines about the historic environment, particularly how to protect the historic environment, so archaeological features, etc. How to ensure what activities you do don't affect landscape in any way. In fact, you know, how to go about enhancing landscapes, and the social effects on people. So that could be recreational, leisure, it could be employment opportunities, and then these two are very, very closely related: soil and water. So guidelines on protecting soils and water within and adjacent to our woodlands. It's a well-researched, well-rehearsed document, and you know, I do recommend that you certainly get a copy and read it. It can just be downloaded off the Forestry Commission website. Just Google UK Forestry Standard and you'll get the latest version. Basically, if you're going down the woodland management process, these are the key themes that you would be expected to you know, consider as part of your process, your management process. There's no separate requirement for forest products in the UK Forestry Standard, but it is an important reason to manage woodlands. So you may have a small woodland that may not be what we call productive in the sort of the classic sense, you know, thinning or felling trees to go to the sawmill and timber markets, but you may still decide you're going to fell a bit of wood for your own use, whether that's sawing it yourself or turning it into firewood yourself. So this is still a very important reason to manage our woods, and we need to bear in mind that we import a significant amount of timber and timber related products into the UK. Something like 80% of all our timber use is imported. So I think this is a key theme within that sustainability theme, is that we look where it's appropriate to manage our woods productively, like I say, where it's appropriate. We'll cover more on that side of things under one of our future webinars on timber sales. I'll put up a slide towards the end with further details about that. So appraising your woodland. So our next slide, just covering some key points here about understanding what you have. And you could do something fairly simple like a COT assessment: constraints, opportunities and threats. And that's just having a good walk through your woodland and understanding it. What are its constraints? Are there any services and any overhead power lines? Are there any water courses? What are your boundaries like? Are they secure from livestock? What are the opportunities that the woodland might provide? Are there opportunities to enhance biodiversity? Are there opportunities for timber production? And then what are your threats? So I mentioned biotic and abiotic. So your biotic threats may be pests, diseases. This is something very much that's come to the fore in recent years. a lot of virulent tree diseases out there at the moment, ash dieback being one, phytophthora larch being another. And then, of course, threats from browsing mammals, grey squirrels, deer, etc., as well need to be brought into the equation, particularly if you're looking at perhaps more sympathetic management techniques, for example, coppicing, encouraging natural regeneration, and biodiversity enhancements. Those sorts of threats really need to be considered. And then our abiotic threats, so that might be wind occurrence, wind blow, waterlogging, drought, those kinds of things. There, I would also say, is particularly if you're thinking about productivity in your woodland, a useful process to go down is to gather basic inventory information in your wood. If you're not sort of a forester from the traditional sense, where you don't have a tape measure and a clinometer for measuring height in your trees, don't worry too much. You could just understand more about the species that you have. What the state of the health of those trees that you have. Just some basic information like that will really help you. Where you could then advance from that is gathering data on the volume that you have, particularly if you want to be considering productivity within your woodland. So there are just some key bullet points there to consider as well. Obviously, make sure these objectives that you're setting are achievable and measurable, and use the findings of your condition opportunities and threats assessment and field survey to help fine-tune those objectives to make them achievable and measurable, and also how you're going to monitor and measure the success. Are you achieving those objectives? So we'll think about that right from the very start of going down that management plan route. I possibly should add at this stage that it's not necessarily a requirement that you write a formal plan. It may be in your head. It may be as simple as a page or two of A4, not going down the full detailed management planning route. But if you are considering some kind of plan, then I would certainly have that monitoring and measuring of success in mind at the start. So, for example, you're saying biodiversity enhancement is a key objective. Well, how are you going to measure that? How are you going to monitor that? Is that through increased levels of natural regeneration, or when you're doing some coppicing, it actually comes back, it's not eaten by deer? You know, those are sorts of things that you need to start to think about from an early stage. So what I'm going to do is just show you some maps now, a series of maps now, to sort of put this into practice. And maybe this is how you write your management plan, is just using maps. And this particular case study, it's a plantation woodland. It's within, as you can see, an arable, predominantly arable landscape. And you know, it's about, yeah, what is it, 12, 13 hectares in size. And I've separated it into three distinct, what we call sub-compartments. And they are separated because of the species that are there. And we'll come on to what those species are in a second. So I've mapped my boundaries and my sub-compartments and my areas. I've then gone on to, through my COT assessment, is understand what the constraints are in my woodland. So I've done this through a survey, a site walkover, a good detailed site walkover, photographs, notes, reference points, that kind of thing. And I've come up with a constraints map. And I've got an overhead power line down in that southeastern corner. I've got a water course that kind of almost runs through the centre of the wood. There's some Himalayan balsam encroaching into the woodland there as well, which I've mapped there in those blue hashed lines. I've mapped my veteran trees, which I think is an important part, particularly if you're looking at biodiversity as a key objective. They really are a biodiversity asset, your veteran trees. So if you can, definitely map those. I've also mapped in my access tracks, woodland rides, and public rights of way as well. And the other thing that I've been able to do is get data on any priority habitats that might be in the area. So you can see that there's a shaded brown area along the western boundary of the woodland, and that's a priority habitat which is classified as good quality grassland. So it'll be a species rich flower meadow in effect. So I need to bear in mind what activity I do in my wood in terms of the management does not affect that priority habitat. So that's all come from my constraints, opportunities and threats checking exercise. Then started to think about my species. So that's how I've divided my woodland up. So I've got those 4 subcompartments, 2 of which, A and C, are mixed broadleaves, mature mixed broadleaves, sycamore, oak, birch, etc. And then I've got 2 other compartments, B, which is Scots pine, and D, which is larch. And I've also, obviously as a forester, done some volume measurements. So I've got an idea of the standing timber volumes within that. So if I get a felling license on there and I want to do some thinning, I can then assess the volumes that are going to come out. That's all part and parcel of getting my timber into the marketplace. So that's our species and basic inventory data map. And then finally, I've got my woodland operations map. So what are my plans for managing this woodland? Where am I going to do my thinning? Where am I going to do my felling? I've identified areas where I'm going to do some ride management. So that might be when I do my thinning or selective felling operations, I widen those rides. And that would then create improved woodland edge habitat and contribute towards my biodiversity enhancement targets. Particularly halo thinning around veteran trees, another good example there as well. So that's my woodland operations plan. And I put a few notes against that. So, ride management, opening up those rides during thinning operations. And I'm going to mow once a year, 3 metre wide strip either side to create that more species diverse herb layer. I'm going to control that spreading area, that spreading patch of Himalayan balsam. That will also help prevent that spread to that priority habitat next door that we looked at on the previous slide as well. That grassland is being grazed, and sheep and cattle are quite happy to graze off balsam, but it does love our woodland environment, unfortunately. So I'm going to put it down that I'm going to try and pull, strim, etc. that invasive species as much as possible. Certainly prevent it from spreading. One of the key things that I'd need to bear in mind is if I'm going to thin that compartment B, it's going to create more light and therefore create a better environment for that balsam to then spread even further. So it's important that I control that before I do my thinning. So these are all the things that I would need to think about. I've not really mentioned larch. Obviously, the key issue there is larch disease, Phytophthora, and so I need to consider that as a very real and present threat going forward. So in my management plan, I'm going to, because I know this larch is ready to fell, I'm going to get a selective felling license on that particular block and fell out all the larch, retaining any other species, and then trying to encourage natural regeneration. And if that failed, I'd then do some intervention planting to make sure that we've got some trees in the future. So that's really quick run through what a management planning process could look like in maps. I'll introduce you to, and hopefully a lot of you already know, the My Forest tool in a second, and how that can help you through that process as well. So there we go, next slide, My Forest tool. So hopefully, I'm going to try and see if this works. Get that link going. What I might do is just finish off the presentation slides and just bring up that link to that My Forest tool just to show you what that is. And then the other tool there is, and these are the partners that we're working with on our project, is Timber Auctions, and just introduce you to that as well. I'll bring those up as soon as I've come out of the slideshow. So just a quick reminder of what Neil mentioned. We've got some other webinars in this series. The next one is how to sell your timber next Tuesday, same start time, 6 p.m. And following that is one on engaging forestry contractors, so that we'll sort of try and focus more on information, good information, so building on those maps that we've just seen, and in terms of responsibilities within the woodland management process, and health and safety. And then the My Forest team are going to be introducing their new geospatial mapping service that they've got going on the, I think that's the final one in this series, on the 21st of March. What I'd like to do, if that's okay, Neil, is just try and bring up the link to My Forest, if that's possible.
Yeah. Do you want to try it from yours? It might be better because it's internet's a bit flaky this end, so give it a go from your end.
I'll try. Yeah, technically, let's see what I can do here. Hopefully this will work. In the slide. I tried it before. Maybe it's something to do with the sharing. What I might have to do is.
Do you want me to give it a go from this end, Will?
No, I can get in. I can get in. I've got to log into my account anyway.
Okay.
The problem was is that. Let's just try. We're in. So what I might have to do is unshare. I don't know if I can just pull it across. Can you see that, Neil? Does that come up?
Got that.
So this is the sort of the operational end of My Forest. This is just one particular few woodlands here, showing a million miles away from Wetherby. Just within North Yorkshire, and the tool allows you to do that mapping. It allows you to create things like plans of operations, so that allows you to apply for your felon license. But what I would say, if you fancy going down this route, is, and hopefully you can see that it says assessor. There's tools here, so you create your account, set up your woodland. There's something called the assessor tool. That's great because that allows you to go through an assessment to say what's the baseline knowledge that you have on your woodland and forestry practice in general. And it's almost like a series of multiple choice questions. And I recommend, if this is something that's new to you, this whole sort of woodland management process, that you definitely give that a go. If anyone fancies doing that, I can certainly have a conversation with them outside of this, or any questions, obviously try and answer them. And as you can see, hopefully you can see that. You can see these are the key themes within the UK Forestry Standard. So for example, if we click on biodiversity, you get asked a series of questions about priority habitats and priority species. And you just follow that process through. And it's very useful, and it sets that baseline of knowledge and information that you have on your woodland already. And the other one I was going to look at was timber auctions. So we're working with these guys to set up an interface. Again, hopefully, Neil, you can see that, can you? Timber auctions. So that's a yes. And an interface. If you go down the My Forest platform, it will then give the option to be able to go down the route of timber auctions to help you put your timber onto the marketplace. That's a few months off. We're just coming up with the format, that how that's going to work, but we'll certainly keep people posted as that develops all the time. That's pretty much it from me. So, questions?
Thanks very much, Will. Some really useful process to go through there. So we now have sort of around half an hour for you to make use of Will's 30 years of accumulated experience. If you have any questions, what I would ask people to do is, if you do have a question, sort of raise your hand, and if you're happy to unmute yourself and show yourself as well. It's nice to see faces in this process, and then Will do his best to answer, and I might even have one or two things to throw in myself, but definitely the spotlight's on you, Will. So, well, it's so comprehensive, there's no questions.
There's bound to be.
There must be. Now, there's always a chance that we've just got everybody turned off and unable to raise their hands. That's always a danger. Could I ask anybody just to send us a quick message in a chat box just to make sure that we haven't got everything disabled, and this is causing a problem. Rachel is typing. All muted. Right, excellent. Somebody who knows how to work this better than we do. Right, how do we unmute everybody? This is not my computer, so I wouldn't normally have this set. Sorry, folks. Right. Sure, there's a way to do this for everybody rather than one person. Gradually allowing everybody to communicate with us. So if you have something you'd like to type into the chat bar, then Will, maybe you can pick one of those up. But
yeah.
1 second. Sorry about this, everybody. There's always something. Right, everybody now has the ability to contribute, I hope.
Hi both.
Hi, Rachel.
There we go.
I'd ask you a bit about the difference between small woodland management plans and large, although they're not called large woodland management plans. But perhaps you could go into that a bit and the pros and cons of both.
Yeah, good question. Yes, you can go down that. Well, it's the sort of the small woodland management plan. It is a bit lighter touch. So they wouldn't expect you to go into the same level, for example, of inventory detail as you would need to do in a sort of, let's call it a standard woodland management plan. They tend to be for woodlands less than 3 hectares. But they are still following the UKFS principles, those 7 key themes. So they'd still ask you to understand, what the biodiversity metrics are there priority habitats, are there priority species. They'd still ask you to have done your homework on, resilience and climate change, your threats from pests and diseases, etc. So although it's for a smaller woodland, it's not necessarily that less of an input, other than the sort of the inventory side of it, your detailed data. They would expect you, the Forestry Commission will, for a full woodland management plan, to have a good understanding of your, if you're going for a felling license, your volumes, you've done some inventory data collection work, I don't want to put anybody. It's a useful thing to do if you've got a small woodland, is to go down that small woodland management plan route. It is useful, but I wouldn't necessarily, because you're doing a UK, you're making it United Kingdom Forest Standard compliant. You still have to go down those routes. That's why when I showed you the assessor tool on My Forest, that's why that's useful, because that makes you think about those processes.
Just, I thought one of the other differences is that if you do a full management plan, you have to do all of the woods on your property, or is that only if you get funding? That would be one of my reasons for perhaps going for a small one, is that you could just do it on one wood. That's
a good question. Look, the Forestry Commission want you to include all your woods on your property. They want you to do that. If you're going for funding, you can only get funding on woods that are registered on land. So I mentioned this rural land registry thing at the start. So you'll only get funding on those areas that are registered on the rural land registry. But ultimately, the Forestry Commission would expect you to include all your woods in your standard woodland management plan. Well, yes, you're right. You could just write a woodland management plan on a small area of woodland within your holding, within your property. That's why I sort of it started off with that felling license versus woodland management plan. A felling license, you could just apply it to a small group of trees, a small copse, for example. I mean, I've done tiny areas on felling license because they've been over felling license thresholds, 5 cubic meters. But yeah, no, that's a good question. That's a good question. That one of what do you include and what you don't include. It's what they expect you, standard plans, to include all your woodlands on your holding.
Could you just expand a bit on the grant funding which is available from Forestry Commission for management plan preparation and then implementation as well?
Yeah, so they've got the Woodland Management Planning Grant, and I think they've just increased it actually. I think there's a standard flat rate of £1,500 for woodlands between 3 and 50 hectares, and then there's a tiered payment scheme for woods over 50 hectares. I think this again you get a standard flat rate of £1,500, and then is it £15 or £20 a hectare? Thereafter, I think it's tiered slightly. They've changed it recently. The exact rates, it's all on the Forestry Commission website. You write the plan, but basically, what I would anybody, if they are thinking of going down that route, is encourage you to register your land parcels. So therefore, you maximise the amount of funding that you can get, and you can include all your woodlands under that plan. And therefore, theoretically, all those woodlands could then go forward for stewardship, ongoing stewardship woodland management grants. So it's well worth going through that initial administration burden to set it all up. It does take time if you do go through that additional layer of registration and applying for the funding. So it might not suit everybody. And of course, if you do consider going down the countryside stewardship funding route, you'd want to be familiar with your commitments to that. So you enter into an agreement, they do expect you to do the work, and that will be checked as well. But if you are someone who is very keen to develop your woodland and enhance biodiversity, etc., then that countryside stewardship route can be certainly worthwhile.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions for Will? Feel free just to pipe up. Oh, okay. If there are no more questions, obviously very thorough presentation there, Will. You've kind of covered pretty much all the bases by the looks of it. Really just want to say thank you everybody for attending. That's been it's good to see.
It's just yeah.
Oh, sorry, go on, Will.
So,
yeah.
There's just a comment Andy sees.
Oh, I can see that.
It's a valid comment about areas below a certain size. Yeah, it's a good point. This. Again, it's one of those complexities in the grant schemes that if your woodland blocks, individual isolated blocks are below 0.5 of a hectare, you can't include them, which is a little bit frustrating, particularly if your smaller isolated woodland blocks may be priority habitats in their own right. You still can't include them in any funding scheme. So thank you for mentioning that, Andy. You're quite right.
Somebody else typing away furiously in the chat there. Feel free just to pipe up and speak if you'd rather do that than type, anyone. There we go. Slightly off topic. Yeah. Are there any long-term visions to reduce the amount of importing?
Yes,
define long-term in forestry.
That's a big question. Maybe Neil could help out with this one. Look, I think we need to plant. I think we need to plant more trees.
Yeah,
I think that's the only way to do it. Obviously, what we're talking about is managing existing woodlands. I think we could do more of that. I mentioned this idea of productivity, and the UK Forestry Standard does not mention timber production separately. But we involved in this, foresters, woodland owners, it should be first and foremost in our minds. I think, yeah, we've got to bring more woods into management. We've also got to plant more trees.
We have. I would just
it's a big topic.
Yeah, it's a really, really big topic, actually. I would. I'll try not to offend anybody. It's about getting the. It's about getting the right kind of trees in the right kinds of places as well, which with current policies and not even policies, but current market drivers isn't always reflected in what goes down the ground. So you'll all be aware, I'm sure, of all these sort of carbon offset schemes, sort of well-known drinks brands, for example, planting up huge tracts of land in Scotland with, the ideas of rewilding and wildwoods. That's not really going to address the issues around the fact that we are the world's second largest importer of timber. If all we're focusing on is trees for trees' sake, because in some way it's going to save the planet or lock up carbon or something, by far the best use of timber is to grow it for a period of time and then turn it into something which locks up carbon for even longer. So, a couple of good examples behind Will there: cupboard door, a bit of structural timber in there, some shelves. You've got a wooden leg, Will. I'm not sure that's common knowledge, but anything that locks carbon up for a longer period of time than simply growing it as a tree, then creates space for a new tree and creates, positive forest management. And I'm guessing by the name on Robinson's biomass, that a portion of the timber that can find its way to displace fossil fuels is also then useful. So if we pursue these sort of trees in the ground and they're going to stay there forever type markets, then that's not necessarily a very positive thing. We need to be looking at a range of different things to do for timber. And the other thing I would mention, I was on a call for a couple of hours this morning for something called the Supergen Bioenergy Hub, which is the main academic network for bioenergy and also biomaterials in the UK. I sit on the board there representing sort of industrial heat markets for bioenergy. And the point I was making to them was that I've never seen so many people interested in what they can do with trees. There's talk of bioethanol for sustainable aviation fuel as a precursor ingredient there, biochemicals, biomaterials. So I think in the short and medium term, rather than reducing the amount of timber we import, we're actually going to see increases in the amount of timber that we import because of all the other interesting stuff that people want to do with it for a low carbon economy. We will start to then see that signal filtering through to farmers who are all wondering what to do with their land, watching somebody today grub up their orchard because supermarkets aren't paying enough for apples and all this kind of stuff. There's all sorts of changes afoot in land use and in farming in the UK. Some nice market signals from the forestry market saying we need more material to turn into all this cool stuff, might actually see some more tree planting. But forestry generally is a long-term game. There are short-term sticking plasters in SRC, SRF type crops, but yeah, we've got to be in this for the long haul. So short and medium term, I think we'll see an increase. Longer term, we'll start to see that tail off, but only if we kind of get that equilibrium right.
There's some really good information that Confor, Confederation of Forest Industries, is sort of one of the trade associations for the forest industry, put together about sort of visions for the future, increasing levels of woodland creation throughout the UK. In Scotland, they're going great guns, planting a lot of new trees. They've got good policy frameworks in place to support that, and we're getting there in England. We do have better policy frameworks, but we've still got a bit of a way to go to. We will never match the levels that they're doing in Scotland, but we can certainly increase the levels that we're currently achieving. They're still pretty low, and to meet government aspirational targets, there needs to be a big step change in that. It's a great question.
Could go on all night, I think, that one.
Yeah, it's a big question.
But we won't. Any more for any more? Oh, we've got a response coming back here. Anybody else want to sort of jump in with any comments or questions? Thanks, Rachel. Okay, if we don't have any more, then I would just once again thank everybody for taking the time to engage and to show up. Hope it's been useful for you. If you think there's anything more that we can do for you as through the initiative, have a look at the website, see if you sort of fit the criteria for support. Feel free to get in touch. Just reach out to us via the web form or via email. I believe you'll be sent an evaluation form at the end. We'd really appreciate it if you'd send that back. Helps us to shape the next couple of years of the programme, gives us a bit of feedback, lets us know whether to pay will or not. There's various positive angles to that. So I will say thank you very much, everybody, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Cheers, Will. Oh, thank you, Andy.